Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you're doing well wherever you are. My name is David Gellis. I'm a business reporter and the corner office columnist here at the New York Times. This is the latest in a series of live conversations we're having with business leaders to discuss how they are confronting the challenges facing their organizations during this crisis. Today, we're grateful to be joined by Emily Powell, owner and chief executive of Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon, the world's largest independent bookstore. A quick housekeeping note, we'll be looking at the chat on YouTube where you are listening now. And if you have a question for Emily, you can use the chat feature there and we'll get to those questions in 30 minutes or so. Please note that this event is being recorded and that this is an audio-only event. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So before we get into the events of the last few months, I think it's important just to talk about the history of Powell's, because the history of your company is in some way the history of book publishing and book selling over the last several decades. So Powell's has been around for almost 50 years now. Just give us a brief history of this company.
Sure thing. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary next year, which will be an interesting year. So well-timed anniversary. My father grew up out here in the Portland area as a commercial fisherman and used fishing as a way to put himself through college, and eventually ended up in Chicago at the university as a graduate student, and needed pocket money and a job. And so he eventually ran the student co-op bookstore and started book selling on the side. He would go around the city and buy books at auctions or at other dealers or bookstores and then sell them to other stores or libraries or universities. And eventually that was going well enough that he was able to open a small store with the help of some university professors. And he opened that store around 1970. And my grandfather came out from Portland to visit and run the bookstore while my parents went on vacation. He'd been retired already. He was sort of a jack of all trades in Portland, a wallpaper hanger, an electrician. And he liked the idea of having a little store as a vacation and watched it, had fun, ran off all of my dad's employees apparently. And then when they came back, went back to Portland and had decided to open his own bookstore. He didn't know anything about books though. So what he did was volunteer in local shops and Goodwill and Salvation Army to sort of see the flow of books, what was coming in, what was going out. And then he'd buy some books for himself, and every night he would call my dad in Chicago and say, here's what I found today. What do you think? Are these any good? What should they be priced at? And so little by little, he built up an inventory and opened his own store in 1971 in Portland, just a few blocks from where our store is today. And then I came along in 78, and my parents were ready to leave Chicago and weren't quite sure where they wanted to head next. But my grandfather sort of called in the nick of time and said, I was retired in the first place. I'd like to maybe go back to being retired. Could you come out and help? And so we all moved to Portland. And right as my parents were getting ready to move, we were notified that the landlord was taking back the lease for the store. So they had a year to find a new location, and that's sort of where the real story picks up. We ended up with the full block that we occupy now, and has been kind of the cornerstone, so to speak, of how Powell's grew into itself over the next 40 plus years.
Wow, what a story. And you mentioned, from a small store to begin with, and I don't know if everyone heard it, but now a full city block.
That's
Just
right.
paint us a picture for a moment. What's it like to sort of step inside Powell's when it's open, at least? Just describe us, paint
Sure.
us a picture of what Powell's is like inside Portland.
Well, it's enormous. It is a full city block, but not just one story. We're 4 stories in one part and 3 stories in another. And we're sort of known a little bit as a maze. None of our floors line up perfectly. So you walk in and you're almost immediately lost, whether it's in trying to find the section you're looking for or just the sort of caverns of bookshelves, very tall bookshelves, close together. In fact, we've had to push those apart over the years just to make more room for customers because we wanted folks to feel more comfortable browsing. But we're certainly known for the experience of surrounding you and almost overwhelming you with books. The rooms, which in and of themselves are quite large, about a quarter of an entire city block for the most part, are color coded, and those colors date back to the original store in Chicago when my father was the only employee, and a customer would come in and ask for help finding a book. He had to be able to easily direct them. So he'd say, oh, that's on the red shelves or that's on the green shelves. Well, now our main entrance is the green room. Our other entrance is our orange room, and et cetera. The rooms go on from there. So we have 1 million volumes in our flagship store, many millions more throughout the company and in our warehouse. But that gives you a sense of we're just very big.
I can almost smell it. I think everyone on this call knows that delicious smell of a bookstore, particularly one with used volumes, and there's nothing quite like it.
So everyone's asked us to bottle the smell over the years. I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but if I could, I would.
Excellent. Well, I think we're all going to need future alternative revenue streams. So if you can get that one, you'll be in business. How, though, have you managed to achieve this in the era of Amazon? I mean, for the last 20 years, it's just been a parade of independent booksellers around the country and around the world, really, who have been struggling to compete with e-commerce. What have you been able to do to essentially buck that trend?
Well, I think most of the credit really goes to my father and grandfather, and that my grandfather, because he wasn't a book person, never limited his vision of what the bookstore could be. So he believed and was one of the first to put used books and new books together on the shelf so that you could afford to take a chance on a book you might not otherwise feel like splurging on in a new, hardcover copy. And that synergy of putting those different versions of writing on the shelf together has been everything for our business. My father, what he brought to the table was a willingness to say, well, if customers are buying this many books and there are more books out there, why not make it bigger? Could we, take over the next part of this block? Could we add a floor? Not with the belief that more is necessarily better. I don't think we follow Amazon in that way, but really with a faith in our customer and the reader and the writer that, there are never enough books, basically. And so if we can continue to do a good job of providing that supply in a well-edited manner, then there are more readers and writers out there who will seek them out. So those two pieces, I think, were really the foundation of what has made us what we are. Amazon came along in some ways already relatively late into our story. We went online ourselves in 1994, which was just slightly before Amazon, but we were already very well established as a very large independent bookseller with a very large inventory and selection. And I think that reality is what has stood us for the most part in good stead ever since then. The other piece is that, we're a real place. People come to us and have a real experience, feel, I think, that they found some community or a sense of self when they wander our shelves and find books that they never knew existed, but speak to them. And when you've had that experience of being in the store and feeling that connection, or feeling the sense of overwhelm that you tend to get when you walk in for the first time, it seems to stay with people. And so even if you're just traveling to Portland and you've had that experience once and then you go home, it hangs out and it allows people to come back and shop with our business online or even send a friend back when they're in Portland. So I really think it's our place at the end of the day. And our commitment to being booksellers, that is what has allowed us to stay as successful as we have been ever since 1994.
Yeah, I have to confess, one of those things that I'm missing so much during this time is just hanging out in bookstores.
Yes.
We all have our local haunts, and from the smell to that sense of just being overwhelmed by all the books I haven't read and having that sense of urgency that I need to go sit down and start reading.
Right.
That is one of those things I miss dearly right now. A reminder to our listeners, you can ask Emily a question yourself. Use the chat feature on YouTube where you should be listening right now, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So we now need to turn to the events of the last few months. And Emily, if you could, let's move somewhat chronologically, but let's start a bit before that week in mid to late March when everything started to change so quickly for so many of us in the United States, and take us back to the weeks or months before that. To what extent was the coronavirus on your radar in the weeks preceding the shutdown and all the developments that happened nationally? Was this something that you imagined when you first probably heard about it in January or maybe February? Was this something that you thought might substantially affect the business? How were you sort of assessing the risk of this before things started to move so quickly?
Sure. It was definitely something I was tracking. I had the flu at the end of December and over the holidays, and it was in fact the flu. I was tested, but as a result, maybe illness was more than usual on my mind. And we were all reading the New York Times and hearing these reports of this virus in China. So I was paying attention. Um, we come out of the holiday season. January is always a busy time for us as we see more travel. Folks taking a little post-holiday vacation. And then spring break is a busy season for us, and it tends to spread out over the better part of March and April, as well as different spring breaks hit around the country. So it's an important time for us, and we were eyeing it very carefully. But the nature of this virus is so strange in that if you were talking about it early, people thought you were crazy. So we were talking about it and trying to balance this. Are we crazy? Are we estimating its potential impact? Or are we just being prudent and cautious? We were talking about it on a daily basis, starting in February. I remember the day that the first case was announced in Oregon very clearly, and we thought, is this, what is about to happen? Is it going to be like other cities in China where it's sort of you see this explosion, or is it going to be slow? We decided to be cautious, and take it day by day. I remember Friday, the 13th of March coming around and feeling a very clear sense at that point we were going to have to close. We didn't yet know quite when, and talking on the phone with our team quite a bit that day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning, which was the day we ended up closing, feeling like, oh, this needs to happen. We are just too big of a space, and we did not feel like we could stay open and potentially participate in a spread of a virus that would hurt our entire community. And of course, our employees were feeling increasingly uncomfortable about coming to work. We are a big public space, lots of people in and out, lots of travelers visiting. It was feeling increasingly uncomfortable to them, and we could not conscience staying open and potentially infecting them as well. So on the phone that morning at 10:30, we just decided we have to shut right now.
And so that was that Sunday.
Yep.
Let me just ask briefly. I want to pick up right there, but in those weeks before, did you make any changes? Was there anything you felt like you could do as the CEO, as someone responsible for the employees and the customers? Did you make any changes to policies or workflows in that week ahead? And then on the business side, did you do anything when it came to capital or inventory or any of the behind the scenes things that might to prepare for what you increasingly, it seemed to believe, could be a very disruptive impact?
Well, we certainly very early on began a heavy sort of sanitation practice, lots of bleach everywhere, lots of hand sanitizer everywhere, lots of practicing new behaviors at our counters, at our checkout counters, at our info stands. We tried to offer a lot of customer service, and of course that quickly started to feel kind of dicey. And so we were, as much as possible, rolling out very regular safety messages to our staff about how to keep themselves safe, of course not to come to work at all if they were feeling sick in any way. I think we have a pretty robust paid time off and health insurance and leave policies. So we felt comfortable with those being available to staff, but it was about renewing the sort of call to action about we need to do everything within our power to protect each other and to protect our community. And then just, talking, staying as in communication with everyone as possible. So on the process side, that sort of encompassed the work change. On the capital or business side, we were looking really hard at inventory. Part of our business cycle means we come out of the holiday season and have to pay down a lot of bills for that holiday inventory, and we use spring break to some extent to help do that. But of course, we were stocking up on inventory for spring break and looking at that time saying, we're not going to have spring break. So what do we do with our inventory? Dialing it back as much as possible, as quickly as possible, while also trying to make sure we had the books so that if people did come to us, we weren't unable to serve them. It was a real tightrope.
Yeah, it must have been very hard to anticipate what was going to happen to demand. And of course, things changed in more unexpected ways. So talk to us about that Sunday to Tuesday when you then made the difficult decision and wrote the letter, your first memo about all this, and ultimately had to make some very difficult decisions. What were those days like, and what did you ultimately decide to do?
Well, they were very intense and all-encompassing days, from the start to the end every day. Ultimately, it came down to we just had to choose the health and the well-being of our community, and when I say community, I mean the folks I come to work with every day, as well as the community at large. Powell's has always thrived only because Portland has thrived, and we've taken that commitment very seriously to be engaged in the 50 years of our history in supporting the Portland community. We couldn't possibly, think that staying open would help our community in this time. So we closed in the middle of the day. Our stores were open and they were full of customers. Interestingly, one of the sort of nuances of the moment was that the public libraries had closed before we did. And public libraries are a haven for a lot of folks who just need a safe place to spend their day. And a lot of that community started to come into our stores, which we're quite familiar with and comfortable with. But in this time, it meant the stores were actually more crowded than usual, and sales were lower than usual because, of course, these aren't folks who were coming to buy books. And so we were having this special sort of tug of war between, we're now feeling even less safe because the stores are fuller than we would like them to be, and we're not, receiving the income to support the work necessary. So that was a component of the sort of change and what we were seeing. Ultimately, we just realized we had to shut down, and we had to shut down as quickly as possible. And then it was a very minute by minute process of who needs to be notified, what do we think the business is that's staying on. I was in contact with the governor's team here in Oregon as much as possible to get their guidance on what they would like from us to help their efforts to protect the state, but also to tell them, here's what we're hearing, here's what we think we need to do, let's make sure we're in sync. So there was just a lot of, trying to reach all of the right people in the region to make sure we were all connected and supporting each other. But again, ultimately the decision was about shutting down, and we expected we would have to shut down our entire operation. That meant our warehouse and our internet business. So it was
and how many people does that include? I mean, I think a lot of people think about a bookstore and they think about like 2 people manning the shop. I suspect you've got a more robust operation than that. How many employees was this?
Before all of this, we had about 500 employees. I always said about 200 of those worked in our main store, obviously not all at once, but to keep the store open 7 days a week, 9 to 11. Another 100, 150 at our warehouse. And then we have several satellite stores and our corporate office with accounting and human resources. So altogether about 500 people. We hoped we'd be able to keep our internet operation going, but of course, without any idea what kind of sales we'd be supporting, how many books we'd have to be pulling off of shelves and putting in boxes, it was very difficult to know how to plan for that. And we also fully expected we would be shutting the warehouse down completely and just Powell's would go on hold for the duration. So we moved in that direction. And then in communication with the governor, I said, what can we be doing? What can we be doing beyond trying to keep people safe and keep people on health insurance? And they said, keep as many people employed as possible. And so I took that as a green light that we could keep our warehouse going. So we turned on a dime very unexpectedly to try to keep our internet business going. Very quickly, as soon as folks, heard that we were shutting down.
Well, I want to get to that in just a sec. But first, there was that difficult moment where you did have to make substantial layoffs, and that of course garnered a fair amount of attention. Of those roughly 500 people, how many people were affected by those layoffs?
At our lowest moment, we went down to about 55 employees, so nearly everyone. Yeah.
Wow.
Nearly everyone.
I mean, just a tremendous, and for everyone listening, I mean, this is the story that was repeated at so many companies around the country that in total, again, led to 38 million and counting on the unemployment rolls. And so, the sympathy, I think, is just shared by everyone. We all feel what a difficult decision that would have been. So then in those days, though, after you made that very difficult decision and got to that lowest moment, it sounds like you were talking with the government. And then, of course, people, when they hear that Powell's is sort of up against the ropes, again, you had 50 years of goodwill now. You have the brand equity. And then what happened? Because people did sort of try to rally around the community.
Right. Well, we're in this, as you mentioned, this very difficult moment of saying, what is the higher good here? Is the higher good to somehow keep the store running and books flowing in order to protect the business, or is the higher good to make sure that people are healthy? And of course, we went with the latter, not knowing what our plans really were for the former, but we felt that's why we closed so suddenly. We just couldn't participate for another moment in thinking that folks might be getting sick because they were coming to work or coming to our store. So then we had to sort of piece together, well, what happens next? And again, we thought initially we would be shutting everything down. And so we went to those 55 employees, assuming we would be going even lower in order to just sort of slowly turn the lights off and wait this thing out. But as you mentioned, customers saw that we had closed. And I think because we were early in the closings, a lot of businesses were still open. A lot of folks were still sort of grappling with what to do. It took a lot of folks by surprise. And maybe that's why we got more of a reaction than we expected, where we were sort of expecting, doom to arrive at our doorstep immediately. We suddenly had this huge outpouring of support in the form of online orders. So we pivoted as quickly as we could to hire folks back and be able to fulfill those orders. That was honestly the most challenging time in many ways, because there were just so many unknowns. And rightly, a lot of folks did not want to come back to work. It's a scary time. They didn't feel safe or comfortable getting on a bus. They didn't have childcare. They have folks with health issues at home. And so it was a very difficult time for our employees to make a choice about what is the right thing for me and for my family. And I respect all of those choices that they were, wrestling with, but at the same time, it meant our orders were sitting for quite some time. And I was trying to, make sure that our customers received the best possible thank you from Powell's for their support, and hear that we were here for them and we need their support on an ongoing basis. And the way we can say thank you is by shipping your order out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And so you were, and so how many people from that, roughly 450 down, how many were you able to bring back?
So initially we brought back another 50 folks, which brought us to about 100. I wrote out to our community at that moment in time. It felt good to know that we had at least that many people back working at Powell's. We're now around 200, a little more than 200 employees. And we're hoping to maintain that as long as we possibly can, until we can open again. And, unfortunately, it's really an unknown. I don't think any of us knows what will happen with our economy and how comfortable people will feel spending any extra money they have on something like a book, and how our customers will continue to support us when our stores aren't open. So it really depends on what happens in the coming months.
Okay, we're going to get to audience questions in a few minutes. A reminder, you can use the chat feature on YouTube to ask Emily a question. Just lastly on the employment issue, and then I want to get to sort of where things stand today. Some of your employees were unionized. They were, of course, among those who had to be let go. You've taken some criticism for I don't know how many of them, if any, were part of the rehiring. Can you just address the labor issue and to what extent the labor situation has played into your thinking about the rehiring and who comes back?
Sure, absolutely. I think we we took the most criticism in that moment of going down to, like I said, about 55 employees, because very few of the folks we kept in that moment were union members. That was not intentional in any way, shape, or form. It was simply a reflection of when you're shutting down a business, you need the folks who have the security codes and know where the contracts are for the utility company and can both direct folks, on how to shut down a business while also doing the work themselves. We've been unionized for 20 years now, and I call it a marriage. We're well married. We're going to be married for a lot longer. Marriages have good days and bad days and days of misunderstanding where there could have been better communication. I think that's all that moment in time was, and we're doing our best on both sides at the moment to repair the communication process and the relationship. And I'm 100% confident that will happen. We have a good relationship through these 20.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And listen, I think we all know that you would like nothing more than to be at full employment tomorrow. Absolutely. If you could.
Yes. Yeah. And at the current moment, we're back to our sort of historic ratio in that, I don't have it in my head, but it's probably 2/3 union members and 1/3 management. Historically, it was more like 3/4 union, 1/4 management.
Currently employed by the company. So a fair, a meaningful percentage of those who have been brought back, it sounds like
Yes.
you're saying
way more
are
than half.
union.
Yep, way more than half. And I don't think in that way when we talk about employment or what the business needs. That's not really how I think about it. It's what's the work and who's the person, and there you go. It's not a matter of, oh, I want this many union folks or this many non-union. It's who are the right people.
Yeah. Well, at a moment when organized labor is so, I think, critical right now, with so many companies going through exactly what you are, thank you for addressing that. So that sort of takes us through the response. Briefly, where do things stand now, and how sustainable is it? You know, those orders that sort of flooded in, I got to suspect some of those were people placing orders to try to keep the company alive. But can you count on those going forward? Where are things today, and what is the outlook for the next few months?
You know, the real honest answer is I don't know. I think of ourselves right now as having been very fortunate in that, if you use a surfing metaphor, we were on our board and a huge wave was coming for us and we paddled as hard as we could. We didn't know if it was going to crash on our head or not. We caught the wave and now we're on it. And the problem is we don't know if it's going to crash us on a rocky beach without any food, if there's a shark hiding in the wave, or if we're going to ride this thing out and land on a nice soft beach down the road. A lot depends on what happens in the next 6 to 18 months. Most folks don't think of Powell's as an e-commerce business. It's certainly not our strength. We don't have the best technology. We're working at that very hard to make sure that we can respond to where folks are right now in their reading and writing needs. But we have room for improvement. So it all depends on both our ability to rise to the current challenge and find our way, to be creative out of this situation, but also on the support of our customers being willing to keep coming back and stay with us through the duration. So it's really an unknown at the moment.
So it doesn't sound like the stores are opening anytime particularly soon. You recently wrote that like so many other Portland businesses, we struggle to see a business model where we can enact the social distancing and safety measures we feel are necessary while sustaining the work of our operations. That's a pretty grim assessment.
Yes.
To unpack that a bit,
Sure.
and explain what you're trying to say there.
So, in many ways, the book business hasn't changed in a very long time, and that's certainly no different for Powell's. When we opened, all we needed were wooden bookshelves, a rotary phone, a cash register, and cash. Now we, like many other retailers, need social media. We need DevOps engineers to build an automated website. We need a database that lives in the cloud that's searchable in a very nuanced way. There are far more costs to doing business. And in Portland, we're also accustomed to a fair amount of tourism, which of course has gone away completely. And who knows, I'm sure it will be back, but I don't know when. So we have this very classic trajectory of expenses have been going up for a very long time. And now we have very few of the sales. And we anticipate when we open, the sales will be quite low, even as folks come back. So how do you make that work, especially as we add the additional expense of creating a very safe environment for our employees and for our customers? You have to be comfortable touching a book, pulling it off a shelf and putting it back and lingering in an aisle. That's going to take quite a bit of work on our part, which we're happy to do, but we have to be able to pay our bills at the same time. So that's the essential struggle, is how do you exist in this modern business retail environment at a time when your sales have returned to a level you maybe haven't seen in 20 or 30 years. We will figure it out, but it will be a very different business and it's going to take us some time. Okay,
well, let's get to some listener questions. And it plays right off just what you were talking about and the next question I wanted to ask myself. And so I'm going to bundle a few here together and I'm going to challenge you to just go a bit deeper. I mean, I know we don't know exactly what that safe bookstore looks like in this era, but I think I want to know, and listeners want to know, what you're thinking about what that might look like actually is.
Sure.
So much of being in a bookstore, as you alluded to, is about touching. It's about smelling. How do you make that safe at a time like this? One listener asks, what's the best advice you can share with fellow retailers about how to go about welcoming shoppers back into your store? And another listener, Martha, asks, have you considered curbside pickup to address the long waits from your warehouse? Walk us through what this business is going to evolve, the new muscles you're going to need, and the new processes and procedures you're going to need to make browsing in a bookstore safe again.
Sure. I'll take the easy question first, and that's we have curbside pickup. It's just launched at our downtown store, and that's available for customers to use. And luckily our internet order wait time has gone down. We've caught up now. About 97% of our orders are shipping within 3 days. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to maintain that and meet folks' needs pretty quickly. But in terms of the sort of deeper questions about being in a store, one of the first immediate takeaways I've noticed, even just from the curbside pickup experiment, is we're all coming out of our house very carefully, but also very eager for that human interaction. So whatever experience we can provide, there needs to be the ability to meet our customers with a smile, with a thank you, with a welcome. We're very happy to have you here, even if that means you're only going to see one employee today because we don't want to put too many bodies in this space. But to make sure people feel really met and welcomed and thanked. So then from there, it will be about how do we limit the number of people in the store, which is quite a bizarre notion for us, given how big our spaces are and how typically crowded they are. So thinking about how do we create a pretty intimate experience and make that work for the business, taking a lot of...
Do you expect to have to do that? I mean, this is a specific question from a reader, Stephanie asked. Do you expect that when you do open, whenever that might be, whether it's this summer or this fall, that you're just going to have to say like max number of people is X, even in a big space like your own?
I think that what we're going to have to do is be very adept at experimenting and being flexible. So we're not being mandated to limit the number of people in our stores by the government, but we of course need to keep folks separate, provide enough space for them to move through the store without feeling bunched up in any particular spaces. So we anticipate that means when we open, we'll have to be cautious about limiting the number of folks in our stores. On the flip side, right now, we're starting to run some auctions to raise money for local nonprofits, where if you donate money, you're entered into a raffle to come shop the store while it's empty. So if you want to shop the store with just a few employees and no one else, now is the perfect opportunity. But yes, I think we'll have to at least start out limiting folks as we all learn how adept can we be as customers in our physical spaces at taking care of our fellow shoppers around us. Taking a lot of lessons from grocery stores, certainly one-way aisles, that type of thing, creating more space between employees and customers when they are interacting. Luckily, a lot of folks have gone before us to practice and try out some things that work. But ultimately for us, it will be about, we have to be in an environment in which the community feels safe coming out and touching an item. We just can't disinfect every single book every single day. And they can't get wet. So that means you have to feel safe enough, and we have to provide enough hand sanitizer and enough space that as you're doing your normal sort of shopping routine, we can protect you and you can protect you.
Right. We're all going to have to reinvent the wheel for all these little things we took for granted for so long. Yes. What about authors talks? This is something else entirely, and you, like so many independent bookstores, welcomed authors to promote their books and do readings and Q&As. But of course, large gatherings are just about the last thing I think so many of us are seeking out these days, even if you can get the store open. So Ferris, a listener, asks, will Powell's consider virtual author talks? How does this impact your business? I suspect getting all those people in and moving a bunch of titles, a bunch of units of one specific title, was a nice little part of the business. Yes.
We are preparing author events. We expect to have some live online author events starting in June, and we're hoping that by summer or fall we can sort of return to an almost normal cadence with our events just online as opposed to in-store. For better or for worse, author events were never a thing that made us money for the most part. They were just part of the work of being a bookstore. If you're a bookstore, you invite authors in to tell you about their work, and that's just part of kind of the fun and the magic of getting to do this on a daily basis. So in that sense, it's not a huge loss, and we also don't anticipate it being a huge boon when we can return to that work. The one area where we will really miss out is we were able to bring some pretty special writers to large audiences in Portland, and that certainly sold a lot of books. And of course, a large audience in an auditorium is not coming back anytime soon. So looking for ways to replace that, certainly we're hoping to find some way to do ticketed events online that are much more exclusive, but also maybe, since we won't be open as many hours, probably, could we do an exclusive event in a part of the store where there are very few people and it's spread out, and it could be safe, but we could get to dab our toe back into the water. I'm not sure. We have a lot of ideas. So much just depends on how this situation unfolds for all of us.
Yeah. A listener, Adam, asks, will this change how you purchase or sell used books? Again, we're thinking about these high-touch items that are coming from environments that you can't vouch for and being passed on to other people who may have questions about the safety and the health of used products in particular, rather than those coming straight from a printing press.
Absolutely. That's a really kind of cuts straight to the heart of Powell's, and used books are really where we stand out and make our mark. We have what we call our online buyback service, where you can go on our website, and if your book has an ISBN, meaning it's from approximately 1970 or later, you can enter the ISBN and we'll make a bid for your book, and you can ship it to us and we'll pay you or give you store credit. We turned that service off at the start of the quarantine. We're hoping to turn it back on because that feels like a safer way to meet our customers who are interested in selling used books and providing inventory we need. They can ship it. That takes a couple days. So that provides a little extra safety. Then we can work with it in a warehouse environment where we're practicing our own safety procedures. But we'll just have to see. I don't anticipate returning to a used book buying counter where there's a one-on-one interaction anytime soon, unfortunately. The good news for us is we have a very large supply because my dad likes to buy used books in large quantities. So we have a warehouse full of used books that still needs to be even entered into our database.
Good. But as I hear you describing all these changes, it strikes me that so many of the things that at the start of this conversation you highlighted that really make Powell's are the very things that are going to be in some ways the hardest to bring back. And this makes me think about how viable this will be as you continue to face pressure from Amazon, which is, again, sort of trying to get back to its business as usual after its COVID surge and trying to, hasten its book shipping times. Just talk about, the threat of Amazon and what it's done to this industry, and talk to us about what you think Powell's and other bookstores are going to have to do to continue to compete with Amazon going forward.
Right. I think the threat of Amazon I've talked about in my life prior to this is in some ways still only really arriving at our doorsteps, and that, by which I mean we are all becoming more and more accustomed over time to placing just one more order on Amazon. Oh, I just ran out of this thing. It's too much trouble to go to that store or to find it somewhere else. I'm just going to pick it up and I'll add something else. And little by little, that's eroded all of our shopping behavior. We see that in Portland, and I know I've heard about it in other cities where the UPS truck doesn't have enough room to park in front of buildings, or lobby spaces are filling up with packages. So that impact was really being felt in an increasingly outsized manner in our business. I'm hoping, and I think we are well positioned, as are every other independent, to hold our own in this moment in time, where what I'm seeing in Portland, I'm hoping is happening in other cities, is customers are really connecting the dots between, if I want my local donut shop to be here after this, they need my support. If I want that hardware store to be here, they need me to go buy that little thing for $2.50. If I'm out of toilet paper, I don't have to go to the grocery store. My local restaurant is selling it right now. And Powell's and other independents have that kind of relationship with their customers in spades. They know us, we know them. And in terms of book selling specifically, what we're relying on, and I know other independent booksellers will rely on, is that we are booksellers to our very core. What we're reading, what we're talking about, the excitement we bring to just putting something new on the shelf or putting it in the hand of a customer, that passion is very real. And we have to do a better job of translating it now that we can't do that work in person. But we are hoping that our customers will both connect their needs and desires with our ability to meet them where they are in this moment in time.
Okay, let's hope so. Support your local business, everyone.
Yes.
Another listener, Alex, asked, is there any advice you could offer to someone considering opening an independent bookstore of their own right now?
Don't do it. That's not good advice. I don't mean that. It is really a lovely line of work. My only advice is that it will always be challenging. Don't get into the business thinking that if I sort of get a few things right in the beginning, that then it will just work and I don't have to think about it again. The work of book selling is always challenging. There's always something new, whether it was the big box stores, maybe in the 90s, and then Amazon, and now this, there's always something. And luckily that mostly keeps it interesting. I would say really build a network and a community for yourself within the independent business world, because you'll find tremendous riches and in support and in advice and knowledge and wisdom there. But just be cautious and careful and know your community.
Okay. We've got one more from a listener on the employees, and Sarah asks what steps you're taking to regain employee trust after having to lay off so many people. And I think it's an important question that employers of all sizes are reckoning with as they try to move through this.
It's a very important question, and it's a very interesting one. I think what I've seen other businesses wrestle with, and I know we've wrestled with as well, is the volume of work for those of us here trying to sort of keep these businesses going has just exploded. It's gone through the roof, but there are fewer of us to do it, of course, and yet the needs of our employees have also expanded greatly. Questions about how to work safely, how to get to work, I can't come to work, or, what does the future hold? The needs on all fronts have just multiplied exponentially, and the choices we have to make on a daily basis about where we spend our time are that much more important. What I'm doing personally is trying to communicate as much as possible, trying, of course, to take care of the business, in my first moments of the day, and then to reach out. And one of my choices has always been to be as transparent as I absolutely can. I always write to our employees and say, please send me any question, any comment, any concern. There's very little I can't or won't talk about. And so please allow me the gift of that moment of being able to answer your questions or address your concerns or share how I'm thinking about how we'll tackle a particular challenge. Anyone who reaches out to me typically gets a pretty lengthy response. That's, of course, more challenging in this time because everything moves more quickly. So what was true, yesterday isn't necessarily true today, but that's my general philosophy.
Yeah, well, you're in good company. Just about every CEO I've been talking to for the last several months has really stressed that notion of over-communication, where even before this, you tried to be transparent, tried to communicate, but the mantra seems to be over-communication, just constantly giving people, what would seem like incremental updates previously are now sort of essential. All right, I want to end on a slightly lighter note.
Okay.
And it's really for the bibliophiles. I think so many people on this call love books, love bookstores, love libraries. And so Gregory asked, have the habits of book buyers changed? Are people purchasing different books now? You get to see this.
Yeah, they really are. It's fascinating. Folks are buying much more sort of classic literature, not modern literature, but things from a different era for the most part, things that are tried and tested and been shown to stand the test of time. They're buying a lot more science fiction and mystery, the sort of beach read genre we're all looking to escape. And of course, lots of kids' books, lots of workbooks, lots of things to help with the schooling at home right now and keeping our kids busy. So it's definitely a different pattern than we would historically see. Okay,
and last question for you. What are you reading right now? I know you're busy. I know you have a family at home, but I'm sure you're getting to sneak in a little time. Can't help but. Yeah, what are you reading these days?
Well, I'm just a nerd at heart. I'm reading some Italian short stories from the 20s and 30s in Italian because I just, like a lot of us, I'm looking for a way to escape to a different place and time where I, on the other hand, might be able to glean a little knowledge and wisdom, but also lose myself in the language of writing. And that's been a real treat, even if I can just get a few pages.
All right. Well, top that, anyone on the line. Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us for today's call. To find out more about our full slate of digital events, including the next installment of Corner Office Live, please visit timesevents.nytimes.com. Next week on June 2nd, I'll be joined by the CEO of Seventh Generation, Joey Bergstein, and he makes toilet paper. So I know we all want to hear what he has to say. And please subscribe to the New York Times. It's the support of listeners and readers like you that makes our reporting possible. We look forward to speaking with you all again, and thank you once more. Goodbye.